In our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, March 16th, here in capital Seoul. President Yoon Suk Yeol is sitting down with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Tokyo on this Thursday, seeking to strengthen bilateral ties amid a host of regional concerns. And just hours ahead of the planned summit between Seoul and Tokyo, Pyongyang early Thursday morning launches an intercontinental ballistic missile into the East Sea. Meanwhile, Swiss regulators offer a lifeline to Credit Suisse after concerns over its financial health rattle its stock market and disrupt investor confidence beyond borders. We begin in Tokyo, where President Yoon Suk Yeol is poised to meet with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida later on this Thursday. The two-day trip seeks to open a fresh era of constructive bilateral ties. It's also the first trip by a South Korean leader to Japan in 12 years, solely for the purpose of a bilateral summit. Earlier in 2019, South Korea took part in the G20 summit in Osaka, but there was no separate summit between the two neighbors back then. Talks between the two leaders on this Thursday will be followed by a joint press conference and a state dinner. Tomorrow, that is Friday, President Yoon is scheduled to sit down with corporate leaders. This latest summit follows Seoul's earlier solution to the issue of compensation for Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor. In related news, efforts to mend bilateral ties are also breathing fresh optimism into prospects of more active cultural exchanges between South Korea and Japan. My colleague Song Yoo-jin reports.
Ahead of the planned summit between South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, all eyes are on whether this can be a turning point for the soured Seoul-Tokyo relations. That includes cultural ties as well. Cultural diplomacy between the two countries kicked off in 1998 after former President Kim Dae-jung and his Japanese counterpart Keizo Obuchi came up with what was called a New Japan Republic of Korea partnership towards the 21st century.
The first Korean wave in Japan started in the early 2000s after the hit Korean drama Winter Sonata aired in Japan. Then in 2010, K-pop rose to the fame thanks to the artists like Kara, TVXQ, and Girls' Generation.
But ties weakened as relations turned thorny from the early 2010s over historical and territorial disputes. This triggered the anti-Korea and no-Japan boycott movements in each country. But the good news is that things have gotten better.
During COVID-19, both Koreans and Japanese people started consuming more of each other's content through streaming platforms.
The fourth Korean wave in Japan is happening right now, where interest not only lies in K-content, but food, products, tourism, and language. The younger generations are leading the wave, whereas during the early 2000s, it was the older generations.
And experts predict President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida's meeting will further boost cultural exchanges.
Cultural, interpersonal exchanges depend greatly on bilateral ties. When relations were not good, it was hard for people in Japan to publicly show their interest towards Korean culture. The bilateral summit could help break this atmosphere.
The same goes for tourism. Strained ties in COVID-19 cut cross-border interaction between Seoul and Tokyo. But it's been recovering since the second half of last year following the easing of virus protocols such as the resumption of visa-free entry between two countries.
School trips and group tours from companies are heavily influenced by diplomatic relations. We're already seeing more school trips from Japan this month. We expect more of these tours to take place after Thursday's summit.
All that's left now is for Seoul-Tokyo cultural and tourism exchanges to get back on track. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, here on the peninsula, North Korea is believed to have launched an intercontinental ballistic missile earlier on this Thursday, just hours ahead of the scheduled summit between South Korea and Japan. Our defense correspondent Kim Yeon-sung has details.
North Korea's fourth show of force in a week. North Korea fired another ballistic missile off to the East Sea, and this time it was a long-range missile, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff confirmed on Thursday morning. It was fired at a high angle and flew about 1,000 kilometers east. Japan's defense ministry said that the missile traveled for about 69 minutes and reached a maximum altitude of 6,000 kilometers. It added that the missile landed around 250 kilometers west of Hokkaido Prefecture's Oshima Island. Analysts gathered from the flight data that this could be an intercontinental ballistic missile, likely the Hwasong-17. The Hwasong-17 is North Korea's largest nuclear-capable missile to date. It's also the world's biggest liquid-fueled ICBM that can be moved on roads. Last year, Japanese Defense Minister Yasukazu Hamada mentioned that this weapon has the capability to reach the U.S. mainland with a potential range of 15,000 kilometers. But South Korea's military officials said that although this launch does bear some similarities to the Hwasong-17, they also did find some differences that could suggest otherwise, although these details cannot be disclosed at the moment. If this test did involve an ICBM, this would mark North Korea's 7th successful ICBM test since 2017. North Korea's latest weapons test comes on the day of South Korea and Japan's bilateral summit and before President Yoon Suk Yeol embarked on his 2-day visit to Tokyo. Their timing hints that North Korea is disgruntled by the rekindled relationship between Seoul and Tokyo.
This is to prevent and rally against the strengthened trilateral alliance between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. They think that this could pose a greater threat to their regime.
There is also the Freedom Shield, the largest Seoul-Washington war games in years. That's now into its 4th day. And North Korea is also holding its own annual training at the moment, all taking part alongside North Korea's lively firearms show and tell. The National Security Council on Thursday morning responded to North Korea's recent threats. National Security Advisor Kim Sung-han held an emergency standing committee with key players, including President Yoon Suk Yeol before his flight. The standing committee members stressed that this latest launch is a clear violation of UN security resolutions and a threat to peace. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
In Switzerland, authorities there are poised to pump liquidity into Credit Suisse should it be rendered necessary as the investor confidence in the lender's financial stability collapsed on Wednesday. Our Ishihu reports.
Swiss regulators said Credit Suisse can access liquidity from the central bank if needed, calming fears around the nation's flagship bank after its shares plunged as much as 30% on Wednesday. In a joint statement, the Swiss financial regulator FINMA and the nation's central bank, the Swiss National Bank, said that Credit Suisse meets the liquidity requirements imposed on systematically important banks. The statement also said that the problems of certain banks in the USA do not pose a direct risk of contagion for the Swiss financial markets, alluding to the collapse of US-based Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. But experts say that risk in the banking sector is being reassessed following the collapse of those banks last week.
And there's sort of contagion, not because they had any connection with Credit Suisse, but because investor sentiment changed and people were scrutinizing other banks more carefully. And Credit Suisse is seen as the weakest link, if you like.
According to CNN, over the few years, Credit Suisse has experienced a series of missteps and compliance failures that have damaged its reputation. In fact, customers pulled out 123 billion Swiss francs, or around 133 billion US dollars from the bank in 2022 alone. And also last year, it reported an annual net loss of nearly 7.3 billion Swiss francs or 7.9 billion US dollars, its biggest loss since the global financial crisis in 2008. Wednesday's drop in share price came after the Saudi National Bank, Credit Suisse's largest shareholder, said it would not buy more shares on regulatory grounds. The European banking index fell by 7%. U.S. stocks also suffered losses, with the S&P 500 losing 0.70% and the Dow Jones Industrial Average falling 0.87%. Meanwhile, the price of some other assets climbed.
Like gold is up, the dollar is up, Bitcoin and crypto are marginally up, because I think people are running to safe haven assets.
Meanwhile, according to a Bloomberg report, the U.S. Treasury Department is working closely with the Federal Reserve and European regulators to review the U.S. financial sector's exposure to Credit Suisse. 이시후, Arirang News.
In other news, U.S. and Russian defense authorities have addressed a hostile confrontation between Russian fighter jets and a U.S. drone earlier this week over the Black Sea. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
Hoping to prevent any further escalation of tensions between Washington and Moscow after a Russian jet allegedly caused an American spy drone to crash over the Black Sea on Tuesday, the defense chiefs of U.S. and Russia held phone talks on Wednesday. The phone call marked the first of its kind between Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Defense Secretary Sergei Shoigu since October 2022 and was initiated by the U.S. After the phone call, Austin held a Pentagon press briefing where he stressed that it's important that great powers be models of transparency and communication. However, he also added that the United States will continue to fly and to operate wherever international law allows, explaining that the drone was flying over the Black Sea in accordance with international law. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says relations between the two countries are at their lowest point, as it expressed regret over the collision between the American drone and the Russian fighter jet over the Black Sea. However, according to Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov on Wednesday, the United States ignored flight restrictions set by Russia in the Black Sea and warned that it will not allow any further invasion of its territorial waters. Still, Peskov insisted that the two sides will continue to hold constructive dialogue in order to avoid further raising tensions between the two countries. Moscow also said Wednesday that it would continue to try to retrieve the MQ-9 Reaper drone that crashed into the Black Sea. Washington says it's also searching for the drone, but noted that it's taken mitigating measures to ensure there was nothing of value on the downed drone in case Russia gets to it first. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Back here on the local front, the number of marriages dropped further last year despite the absence of COVID-19 restrictions on social gatherings. According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, the number of registered marriages fell by 0.4% on year in 2022 to 192,000. The number of marriages has been falling since 2011, but its pace slowed last year amid eased pandemic regulations. Meanwhile, the number of international marriages rose by 27.2% on year, up by 4,000 compared to the year prior. Also in local news, people here may be looking ahead to a long weekend holiday for this year's Buddha's birthday, which falls at the end of May. This comes amid government plans to designate substitute holidays for Buddha's birthday and Christmas Day. Seoul's Personnel Management Ministry on Wednesday said preliminary announcements on the revisions legislation will be available starting Thursday. Also, public opinion on the matter will be gathered by early April, and if all goes according to plan, the bill will be approved by the President next month. Accordingly, this year's Buddha's birthday holiday, which falls on May 27th, a Saturday, will be extended to include May 29th, a Monday. And Seoul is currently hosting an exhibition that showcases the latest advances in efforts to build more affordable, efficient and sustainable batteries for electric vehicles. Our Moon Hye-ryun was there.
Last year, the total number of electric vehicles registered in South Korea rose by nearly 70% on year. The number of gasoline cars recorded just a 2% rise during the same period. In line with this trend, Korean companies are stepping up their game in not only electric vehicles, but one of their most fundamental parts, batteries. As a result, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy and the Ministry of Environment are hosting the annual Interbattery and EV Trend Korea trade shows this year in Seoul for 3 days starting Wednesday. Interbattery 2023 consists of a record number of companies and booths showcasing the latest battery technologies from both home and abroad, and more than 35,000 people are expected to visit. The highlight are the booths run by Korean companies SK On, Samsung SDI and LG Energy Solution. Combined, these companies were reported to have a market share of 23.2% in the battery industry last year. LG Energy Solutions' battery swapping station enables users to quickly switch a used battery for a fully charged one on the spot. SK On's super-fast battery won the Best of Innovation Award at the 2023 Consumer Electronics Show as the fastest charging battery in the world. taking just 18 minutes to be fully charged. Samsung SDI offers a battery that uses solid electrolytes instead of liquid in order to increase the capacity of the battery, meaning that electric cars using this type of battery can run longer.
But is it really green transport if it's not sustainable? The reuse and recycling of batteries is becoming just as important as producing more efficient and cheaper batteries.
Korean companies such as Mintech work with battery and electric vehicle firms to help them reuse old batteries.
Electric vehicle batteries can be reused even after the vehicle has been scrapped because they are usually in good condition.
While the Korean government is bolstering its electric vehicle and battery production with subsidies, it seems that their next task will be to step up its efforts in battery recycling like the United States. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And Samsung Electronics continues to lead the global soundbar market. According to market research firm Futuresource, Samsung has maintained its #1 spot for the 9th year in a row in 2022, given the stellar performance of its Q-series soundbars. In terms of sales revenue, Samsung accounts for over 20% of the market share. Samsung's strategy this year is to further expand into the global market with new soundbar products featuring advanced surround sound systems. Meanwhile, the global soundbar market grew to some 23 million units last year and is expected to surpass 26 million units in 2025. On a light note now, Korea's city of Cheongju has a library that accommodates a drive-through which allows you to borrow and return books from the comfort of your car. Our Chung Won-ju explains.
A vehicle enters a booth set up at one side of a parking lot. Once the car stops, a small window opens and a book comes out. This is a drive-through library. The Yurbong Smart Library's book drive-through in Chungcheongbuk-do province is the first of its kind in South Korea. The library recognizes vehicle license plate numbers and allows users to automatically borrow and return books. Smart libraries where users can apply to borrow a book online and pick them up from an unmanned system already exist. But this new drive-through library is more convenient. It's also possible to borrow books without car license plate number recognition, but using membership cards. The library is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Yurbong Smart Library has about 250 books. The interlibrary loan service also enables users to pick up and return books from 19 libraries and 9 small libraries in the Cheongju area. The Cheongju Municipal Library expects the new system will help increase citizen satisfaction when using the library and promote reading.
We are the first library in the country to use the vehicle number recognition system. The service allows citizens to conveniently borrow books without getting out of the car if they have reserved a book online in advance.
The city of Cheongju plans to install unmanned libraries in areas where there are no public libraries and expand drive-through services based on the success of Yurbong Smart Library. Chung Won-ju, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Turkey, the country's quake-hit southeastern region has now been hit by floods. At least 14 people have been killed and several are missing after 2 cities were hit by flash floods on Wednesday. 12 of those killed were in the city of Şanlıurfa, while the other 2 deaths were in Adıyaman. Search and rescue efforts by diving teams and firefighters are still underway. The floods were caused by sudden torrential rainfall, with one area of Adıyaman province receiving 136 millimeters of rain in just 24 hours. Şanlıurfa province received a third of its annual rainfall in just 2 days. Rains are expected to continue until the end of the week. Among those affected by the floods are families living in containers who were displaced by the major earthquakes last month that killed 48,000 people. Shifting our attention to California, where approximately 100,000 residents are without power and over 20,000 are under evacuation orders, following heavy flooding and ferocious winds in the state. The floods come on the back of torrential rain and storms over the past week. State Governor Gavin Newsom has declared a state of emergency for 43 of the state's 58 counties, as daily rainfall records were broken in Los Angeles, Santa Barbara and Santa Maria on Tuesday. And with floods set to move east, another 25 million people in the central U.S. are under threat. Other areas in California, meanwhile, have been lashed by gale force winds of up to 150 kilometers per hour. Meanwhile, NASA has unveiled the prototypes of the spacesuits set to be used by moonwalkers in its upcoming lunar mission. Called the Axiom Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or AXIM-U, these suits were introduced at the Moon to Mars Festival in Texas on Wednesday, local time. NASA plans to have its astronauts wear the suits during the Artemis 3 lunar mission in 2025. Compared to older models used in previous moonwalking missions, the new suits are designed for improved protection, a better range of motion, and will feature innovative equipment. They can also be adjusted to fit the wearer's dimensions. The moon suit maker, Axiom Space, says that the final version of the suit is still in development and will eventually be colored white, like its predecessor. And finally, Red Bull stunt pilot Luke Japila made a bullseye landing when he set his airplane down on the helipad of Dubai's iconic Burj Al Arab building. The stunt on Tuesday was the first time ever that a winged aircraft has landed on the 27-meter-wide helipad, which is 212 meters above the ground. With less than 21 meters of helipad runway available, Chapila was able to land his short takeoff and landing aircraft on his third attempt, without using visual aids. The achievement comes after lengthy preparations that started in 2021 and involved over 650 practice landings in Poland, the United States and Dubai. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Some sprinkled here in central regions, suddenly turning below average today. Afternoon highs are 2 to 8 degrees lower compared to yesterday afternoon, but southern provinces are still having highs that are above seasonal norms. Now, the air quality will be decent for most areas except for Chungcheongdo, Jeollabuk-do, and Gyeongsang-Buk-do provinces, with bad dust levels during the day, before turning to normal later in the day. Now, the dry advisory has been expanded to more areas, and strong wind remains on Thursday, with strong wind advisories issued for Korea's easternmost islands, Ulleungdo and Dokdo today. Sunny skies will become cloudier as we head into the second half of the day. Seoul, Chuncheon, and the rest of the central regions are having a much cooler afternoon. Now, this round of spring cold will be short-lived, with temperatures returning to normal tomorrow afternoon. Meanwhile, Jeju and the south coast will see on and off light rain tomorrow. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Those are the headlines at this hour. Coming up next is our panel session, and today we address President Yoon summit with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida over in Tokyo on this Thursday. See you soon.